Thanks, Andrew. I think that talk and the entire Reefense program and the goals they're trying to do, I think really dovetails nicely with some of the conversations we were having yesterday about the future of the restoration economy and the way things are likely to move forward with our field and the opportunities that we have to accomplish a lot of goals, accomplish our goals of reef restoration through a lot of different angles moving forward. And so now I want to welcome Professor Rob Toonen to talk about a similar effort that they have underway in Hawaii that's going to be testing a number of different options from what Andrew's talking about here, so we can understand both what works well in different systems as well as compare different approaches to each other, because they're trying to achieve the same goals that DARPA has set for them here. So Rob, thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me, and I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of our team, the Rapid Resilient Reefs for Coastal Defense, to talk about how we're approaching this. And as Andrew said, DARPA has set some pretty ambitious guidelines for what it is that we are supposed to accomplish in this program. And just like with Andrew's program, this is not a solo effort, this is a team effort, and so I'd just like to talk through the TA1, our team, basically the base structure design, Jianhua Huang at UH, Sid Verma, FAU, and Richard Ogle with Mackay Engineering are leading that effort. For TA2, the ecosystem engineering part, which is essentially habitat complexity in our eyes, that is led by Josh Maiden and Daniel Wagenspert, Aaron Thode at SIO. And then the adaptive biology, which is I am leading with Ford Jury and Kira Hughes in the Coral Resilience Lab at HIMB, and Josh Voss at FAU. And so our team is led overall, the integration team, by Ben Jones, the PI on this project at the Applied Research Lab, and Josh Levy is our program manager. And this is just a graphical sort of abstract of the project, and I'm going to explain this in more detail as I walk through the slides, and I will come back to this at the end. But we really see this as three main challenges. Each of these technical areas have a primary challenge, and for technical area 1, it's how do you take these incredible plunging waves that Hawaii is famous for, build something that will take out 90% of the wave energy, and then grow corals on it. And so our approach to that has been perforated structures that Jianhua and Sid are basically doing the fluid dynamics, looking at how those perforated structures attenuate wave energy by flow separation. They prototype, they design these little units that they test in wave flumes, and they go through the process multiple times. But it's a different design than a lot of people envisioned, and it is not a single monolithic structure. Instead, it is a distributed flow field that is based off of a live coral reef sort of model. So what we envision is to take a look at a real coral reef, to look at the bathymetry and the existing coral reef structure. If you get a LiDAR scan of that area, you can use a machine learning approach to basically design the perfect coral reef of what would attenuate the wave energy, and then add these structures back into an existing coral reef structure to try to take out 90% of the wave energy across a broad area of the forereef, the reef crest, and the back reef that you would see in a natural situation. But these little wiffle ball things don't really look like a coral reef to any of us. And so technical area 2, the challenge is, how do we recruit the incredible biodiversity of life that makes reefs these amazing places on these engineered hybrid structures? And so part of that, Josh Maiden is looking at mesoscale complexity. He's really interested in what are the diversity of little holes and crevices and sizes on a reef that maximize biodiversity. How do you make the habitats that provide the homes for all these different organisms? And how do you go through, sort of thinking about the ideal little ridges and nooks and crannies that coral larvae like to settle on? And so he has a variety of different structures up here that look like nice hidey holes for a variety of fishes and invertebrates, and then a variety of different structures to try to recruit larvae. But it's not just about the structure of the larvae. We also have to think about settlement cues. And so Daniel's work here is thinking about what is it that larvae are looking for when they contact the surface. And Daniel does 3D bioprinting, and so here they printed a live biofilm that coral larvae are attracted to. He can encapsulate larvae into these biomaterials and basically set up these little coral larval prisons where they have to settle in those locations and grow up. He's developed bionic corals, like this is a corallite of an actual coral, then he 3D prints this, but he can also print the actual coral polyps with tentacles with living cells in them. And most recently what he's been working on is printing polyp bailout, basically taking those polyps from corals and encapsulating them in these biogels and an artificial CCA in which you can not only duplicate the optical properties of crustose coral and algae, but you can incorporate the biochemical cues that crustose coral and algae produces to try to get those larvae to settle. And then there's sort of the broader area around that. And so Aaron is looking at what is the reef soundscape? What does a thriving, healthy reef sound like? And if we enrich the area around this, can we actually bring in those herbivorous fishes that will help us to keep the algae down on the reef? In Hawaii, we're blessed with an indigenous culture that has a long and rich tradition of practices that allowed them to manipulate nearshore environments and to increase their food production for their next generations. And so we can build on that. We still have some of these kupuna available to us to talk about how did they used to build things like these rock pile fish houses, umukai, that allowed people to increase the habitat for settlement of juvenile fishes and invertebrates and take advantage of that to seed the coral reef around it. And people have seen these slides a couple of times. The same one has been used in multiple talks. You know, even if we do all of this, how do we put corals on those structures that are actually going to survive future oceans? The global predictions for temperature don't look great for today's corals. And so it's all about trying to get corals that will actually grow and survive on these structures. And so, as Andrew was saying, we've got a whole variety of different materials out there that people are talking about, some potentially greener versions of Portland cement. So one of the first things that we're trying to do is test all of these things that we can get, and this is a collaborative project with TNC and Oceanit, and our team trying to look at every one of these things that we could get our hands on with a whole range of corals and see how do they perform, how do they work, which ones are the most cost effective. Then we have to take those things and we have to optimize the skinning over of those with live coral tissue. So how do we go about looking at fragment size, spacing, and materials to produce things with the maximum growth and minimum mortality for each of these species? And then there's a variety of things that people are now, sort of along the lines of what Andrew was saying. The Coral Resilience Lab has been working hard on trying to look at selective breeding, chimeric fusion, and using biomarkers to identify these resilient corals. And if you look at a typical bleaching scene like this, we see an awful lot of white, but we also see a couple of colonies here that just don't seem to care that much. And they come through these events apparently unfazed. Well, if you collect the gametes from those, you bring them into the lab, and you recruit those larvae, how well do those things perform in terms of the next generation? And rather than me telling you about that, I would like to hype these three young men who are doing this work, and their talks have changed since I put this slide together, but they will be talking about this tomorrow, and if you're interested in the selective breeding and the increased thermal tolerance that they're seeing, please attend their talks. But even if we do that, is it enough? And these are high-value reefs with a lot of manpower and a lot of effort into them. And so we're looking at a variety of these direct interventions and asking, are any of them scalable and cost-effective? Things like bubbling or direct shading or misting. We're thinking about how do we go about underwater feeding of corals that have bleached, and this is a partnership, collaboration with Andrea Grattoli at OSU, to feed those corals and have them survive a bleaching event. We're working with Mackay Engineering, who are these seawater air conditioning experts, to look at an artificial upwelling and direct heat exchange to try to actively intervene if there is a marine heat wave, to try to understand if this can actually save that reef. And because, just like we're experiencing right now here in Florida, Hawaii and many Pacific Island nations are really already suffering the effects of climate change. When we look at our coastlines in Hawaii, we are looking at imminent loss of coastal infrastructure. Houses are falling into the ocean, our roads are starting to collapse, and as Andrew said, this is not a solution, but it is a way to buy time. And we need that time in these sorts of situations to figure out an alternative. And so Hawaii, there's a second effort that I'm not going to be able to talk in much detail about, but this is an effort that is being led by the Department of Transportation, the Highways group, largely by Dave Gulko and the DAR Hawaii Coral Restoration Nursery, to try to increase the height of coral reef crests. So as we have sea level rise, can the reef keep up with increasing sea level? And the idea is to put out these modules to increase the reef crest height, keep up with sea level rise through that process. And maybe at some point, if we need to, we can start thinking about merging these projects, building back reef areas, and adding in more to try to dampen wave energy and protect our roads. So bringing it back around to this graphic, we're starting with a natural reef, we're adding these various base structures, trying to make it an attractive place for larvae to settle. We're trying to develop these selectively bred and adaptive corals that will actually survive on there, and we have strategies to intervene if they fail. And the whole goal of this is to try to mitigate the impacts on our roads and our coastal infrastructure so that we have the time to actually find a better solution or to turn it around. And with that, I will stop.